They did everything they were told to do. Worked, paid, waited, and still one day the house stopped being theirs. Stay with this story, because losing a home doesn't always start with a mistake.
The house looked exactly like the dream. 2 floors, white siding, a small front yard with a tree they promised to water, a driveway just wide enough for 2 cars, and the illusion of stability. If you're enjoying this channel, leave a like and subscribe. Help this project grow. At the end, I'll reveal every file stored here. They signed the papers on a Tuesday, shook hands with a man whose face they forgot before they reached the parking lot, smiled for a photo they never framed. The realtor talked about equity like it was oxygen, something you'd breathe in naturally, something you'd always have. 30 years, that's what they were told. 30 years, and the house would be theirs. But ownership, they'd learn, was a word with conditions written in fine print. Conditions that grew teeth when no one was looking. At first, everything worked. The payments went through like clockwork. The neighborhood felt permanent in a way their previous apartments never had. They learned the sounds of the street, the rhythm of trash days, the neighbors' routines, who left early, who came home late, who fought behind closed blinds. They raised their children inside those walls, measured their height against the doorframe in pencil marks that climbed slowly, stubbornly upward, painted over old colors instead of fixing what mattered, ignored the small cracks that spread slowly, quietly, like whispers through plaster. The mortgage never felt dangerous, just heavy. Like gravity, something you adjusted to, something that bent your spine without breaking it, at least not right away. The first 5 years passed in a blur of normalcy. Birthday parties in the backyard, Halloween decorations that became more elaborate each October, a sense of belonging that felt almost real. They waved to neighbors, borrowed tools, returned them, kept the lawn trim enough to avoid judgment. Not perfect, just acceptable. That was the rule here. Don't stand out. Don't fall behind. Exist in the narrow space between those 2 extremes. But the numbers started changing, slowly at first. So slowly they convinced themselves it was normal. Taxes went up, insurance went up, the water bill doubled after the county reassessed infrastructure costs. Repairs waited. The roof leaked in one corner during heavy rain. The furnace made a sound like grinding bones every time it kicked on. The driveway cracked in a zigzag pattern that looked like lightning frozen in concrete. They told themselves they'd deal with it, later. When things settled, when the bonus came through, when the kids needed less, when time and money finally aligned, credit cards filled the gaps, small amounts manageable. A few hundred here, 1,000 there, groceries, gas, a school trip, new tires, a water heater that died on a Sunday. Each charge felt justified, necessary, temporary. They'd pay it off next month. They always said next month, but next month had its own emergencies, its own necessary expenses, its own reasons to postpone. Every month the mortgage payment arrived with new numbers attached, escrow adjustments, fees no one explained, recalculations based on formulas they didn't understand. The original payment had been $1,218, manageable on 2 incomes, tight but doable. Now it was $1,793, then $2,041, then more. The number climbed while their salaries stayed frozen. Cost of living adjustments that never quite covered the cost of living. They never missed a payment, not once. That's what they told themselves when the anxiety came at 3 in the morning, when the weight in their chest felt like a hand pressing down. They were responsible. They were doing everything right. They showed up. They paid. They followed the rules, but on time started to mean just barely. It started to mean checking the account balance twice before clicking submit. It started to mean moving money between accounts like a shell game, robbing Peter to pay Paul, then robbing Paul to pay the mortgage, then robbing the grocery budget to pay Peter, a circular debt machine that ran on hope and compound interest. The house still looked good from the outside. That was important. That was survival. Peeling paint on the back porch didn't matter if no one saw it. A cracked window in the garage could be ignored. The basement smelled like mold, but they kept the door closed. Appearances mattered more than infrastructure. That's what the neighborhood taught them. That's what America taught them. When the first letter arrived, it sounded polite, almost apologetic, a reminder about a missed escrow payment, except they hadn't missed anything. They'd paid, on time, like always. They called the number at the bottom of the letter, waited on hold for 37 minutes, listened to a recording that told them their call was important. When a human finally answered, they explained the situation. The representative said she'd look into it, said someone would call back within 2 business days. No one called back. When the second letter came, it sounded firmer, less apologetic. It mentioned fees, penalties, a timeline. They called again. Different representative. Same hold music, same promise of a callback, same silence afterward. They sent emails, faxes, copies of bank statements showing the payments had cleared. Everything disappeared into a system that didn't respond, didn't acknowledge, didn't care. By the third letter, the language changed. No more polite reminders, no more customer service tone. This one had legal words: foreclosure, default, acceleration. Words that sounded like falling, like doors slamming, like the end of something. They hired a lawyer who charged $300 an hour to tell them what they already knew. The bank had the right. The contract said so. Page 11, Section 4, subsection C, the part no one reads because reading it feels like inviting disaster. They tried everything. Applied for modification programs, hardship reviews, extensions, all of them temporary, all of them expensive, all of them designed to extract a little more before the inevitable. They sat through phone interviews where strangers asked about their spending habits, their grocery bills, their car payments, whether they really needed 2 vehicles, whether they'd considered downsizing, moving somewhere cheaper, giving up. They answered every question, provided every document, did everything asked. It didn't matter. The bank spoke in numbers. They spoke in years, in memories, in the pencil marks on the doorframe, in the tree they'd planted. In the bedroom where their daughter had nightmares and their son learned to read. None of it translated. None of it computed. The system didn't have a field for that data. The notice was taped to the door while they were at work, folded carefully, official, final. 30 days to vacate. The neighbors saw it first. Word spread faster than fire. By the time they got home, the street felt different. Eyes behind curtains, conversations that stopped when they walked past. Sympathy that looked like relief. Relief that it wasn't them, not yet. They packed quietly, room by room, memory by memory, decided what fit in a storage unit and what fit in a trash bag. Most of it ended up in trash bags. A decade of accumulation reduced to what could be carried. The kids cried, asked questions that had no good answers. Why are we leaving? Where are we going? What about school? What about my friends? What about the tree? They said things parents say when the truth is too heavy. It'll be okay, this is temporary, we'll figure it out. Lies that felt like kindness. Neighbors avoided eye contact. No one knocked. No one offered help. Sympathy from a distance. Pity without proximity. That's how it worked here. Failure was contagious. Struggle was something you did privately, quietly, without bothering anyone. They'd done the same thing 3 years ago when the family 2 streets over lost their house. Watched from behind blinds, felt grateful it wasn't them. Now they understood. Now they were the lesson everyone else learned. On the last night, the house sounded different, empty, hollow, like it had already forgotten them. They walked through each room, looked at the spaces where furniture had been, the clean rectangles on dirty carpet, the nail holes in the walls, evidence of a life that used to exist here. The pencil marks were still on the doorframe. They thought about erasing them. Decided not to. Let the next family wonder. Let them think someone else had made it, had stayed, had won. They locked the door, left the keys on the kitchen counter. The lawyer said to mail them, but that felt wrong, cowardly. They wanted to leave them in person, wanted the house to know they hadn't abandoned it, that they'd been forced out, that this wasn't surrender. It was defeat. There's a difference. One is choice. The other is inevitability. They drove away without looking back. That's what people say you're supposed to do. Don't look back. Move forward. But forward felt like falling, felt like driving away from the only place their children had ever called home. The GPS said, turn right. They turned right. It said, merge. They merged. It didn't say where they were going, just away. That was enough for now. Years later, the house still stood. Same white siding, same small tree. Taller now. Someone else lived there. Different furniture through the windows. Different cars in the driveway. Different laughter on summer evenings. The house looked exactly the same, like nothing had happened, like they'd never existed there at all. But the debt followed them longer than the address ever did. Followed them to apartments they couldn't afford, to jobs that paid less than the mortgage used to cost, to credit reports that screamed failure in 7-year cycles. The debt had legs, had memory, had patience. It could wait. It always won in the end. They didn't lose the house because they failed. They lost it because the rules changed, slowly, legally, without apology, because the game was rigged and they'd been playing with borrowed time and borrowed money and borrowed dreams that were never really meant for people like them. The house was bait. The mortgage was the hook, and they'd swallowed it whole because everyone said, this was how you won. This was success. This was the American dream. It was never really theirs. It just let them live there for a while. Let them believe. Let them hope. Let them think that showing up and paying and following the rules meant something, meant safety, meant permanence. But the house knew the truth the whole time. It had seen families before them, would see families after. It didn't care who lived inside, didn't keep score, didn't remember. Only they remembered. Only they carried it. The weight of what they'd lost. The shame of what they couldn't keep. The knowledge that they'd done everything right and it still hadn't been enough. That's the part that stayed. That's the part that followed them into every new place, every new beginning. The understanding that nothing was ever really theirs. That ownership was a lie. That the only thing you ever really owned was the debt. The storage unit smelled like regret, concrete and rust, and the accumulated breath of abandoned things. They paid month to month. $149 for a 10 by 15 space, filled with furniture no apartment would hold. Photo albums no one looked at anymore. Boxes labeled bedroom and kitchen and miscellaneous that would never be opened. Sometimes they drove past it, never stopped. Just drove past and felt the weight of everything they'd kept but couldn't use. Things cost money even when you're not using them. That's the trick. The system finds a way to keep charging. The apartment was smaller than the house. Obviously, 2 bedrooms for 4 people the kids shared. They tried to make it feel temporary, like a pause before things got better, but temporary became 6 months, then a year, then longer. The walls were thin. They heard neighbors fighting, heard televisions through the ceiling, heard footsteps at 2 in the morning, heard proof that everyone was struggling. Everyone was barely holding on. It didn't make them feel better. Just less alone in the drowning. Work became a place to hide, somewhere with structure, with expectations that made sense, with rules that didn't change in the middle of the game. He left early, came home late. She took extra shifts, double shifts, anything to avoid sitting in the apartment feeling the walls press in, feeling the kids' eyes asking questions they'd already answered, feeling the weight of failure like a coat they couldn't take off. The kids adjusted the way kids do. Quietly. With resilience that looked like acceptance but was really just survival. They stopped asking when they'd move back, stopped mentioning friends they'd left behind, stopped drawing pictures of houses with white siding and small front yards, started drawing apartments, started accepting less, started learning the lesson their parents had learned too late, that wanting things was dangerous, that hope was a debt you couldn't afford. School was harder now, new district, new kids. The kind of new that never really wears off. Their daughter got quieter, came home and went straight to the bedroom, did homework with the door closed, stopped talking about her day. Their son asked questions about money at dinner. Where does it come from? Why don't we have more? Why can't we just get a house again? They tried to answer without crying, without screaming, without telling him the truth. That money was a river, and they'd been born downstream. That the game was rigged before they'd even started playing. That the house had never been the prize, just the bait. The lawyer sent a letter, said the foreclosure was final, said the bank had sold the house at auction for less than they'd owed, said the difference was now their responsibility. $43,000, a deficiency judgment, legal words for debt that never dies, debt that compounds, debt that follows. They filed for bankruptcy. Sat through credit counseling that felt like punishment, like detention for failing at capitalism. The counselor talked about budgeting, about priorities, about making better choices, talked like they'd been reckless, irresponsible, like they'd chosen this. They wanted to ask what choice they'd had, what better decision existed when everything cost more and paid less, when the bills came monthly but the raises came never, when the math never worked no matter how carefully you calculated. But they stayed quiet, nodded, signed the forms, added bankruptcy to the list of things they'd never thought would happen to them, things that happened to other people, irresponsible people, lazy people, people who didn't try hard enough. Now they knew better. Now they understood. The system didn't care how hard you tried. Effort wasn't currency. Labor wasn't protection. Showing up wasn't enough. The bankruptcy cleared some debt. Not all. Never all. The credit cards disappeared. The medical bills vanished, but the deficiency judgment stayed, immune, protected. The bank's money was special, government-backed, too important to forgive. They owed it forever, or 7 years, whichever came first. 7 years of wage garnishment, of tax refund interception, of letters that said final notice but never were. 7 years of being reminded that leaving the house didn't mean leaving the debt. She started having nightmares, woke up gasping, sweating, dreaming about letters taped to doors, about locks changing, about sheriffs with eviction notices. He pretended to sleep through it, pretended not to hear her crying in the bathroom at 4 a.m, pretended the weight in his chest was normal, manageable, just part of being an adult, just part of surviving. Everyone felt this way. Everyone carried this. That's what he told himself. That's what kept him getting up, going to work, coming home, repeating. They stopped talking about the future, stopped planning, stopped pretending there was a path forward that didn't involve just enduring, just surviving, just making it to the next month, the next payment, the next crisis. Life became a series of small disasters they managed without ever really solving. The car needed brakes. They got brakes. The dentist said the daughter needed braces. They said later. The son needed new shoes. They bought them 2 sizes too big so they'd last longer. Every decision was triage. Every choice was about what could wait and what couldn't. Nothing ever really got fixed, just postponed. The apartment lease renewed automatically. Rent went up, always went up. $100 more, then $150, then $200. The landlord sent emails about market rates, about improvements, about the value they were receiving. The improvements were new mailboxes, paint in the lobby, things that benefited the landlord more than the tenants. But the rent went up anyway, because it always did, because the market said so, because there was always someone more desperate willing to pay more for less. Holidays became performances. They bought gifts they couldn't afford, because not buying them felt worse, felt like admitting defeat, felt like telling the kids that their failure was complete, that there was nothing left to give. So they bought things, wrapped them, pretended, smiled through the morning. Returned some of it later when the kids weren't looking, kept the receipts, calculated which gifts would be missed and which wouldn't, turned joy into mathematics, turned love into budgeting. Her mother asked why they didn't just buy another house. Prices were good. Interest rates were low. Time to get back in the market. She didn't understand. Couldn't understand. She'd bought her house in 1974 for $38,000. Paid it off in 15 years. Now it was worth $600,000. She thought it was the same game, the same rules. Didn't realize the field had tilted, that the goalpost had moved, that the ladder she'd climbed had been pulled up behind her. They stopped trying to explain. Just nodded. Changed the subject. Let her think they weren't trying hard enough. Let her believe the lie that effort equals outcome. His father said they should have saved more, should have been smarter, should have seen it coming. Easy to say from a pension and a paid-off mortgage, easy to see the trap after you've escaped it, easy to judge the drowning from the shore. They stopped visiting, made excuses, said work was busy, said the kids had school, said anything that meant they didn't have to sit through another lecture about responsibility from people who'd played the game on easy mode and thought it was skill. Time did what time does, moved forward, didn't care, didn't wait. The kids got older. Started understanding more, started asking different questions, harder questions, about why things cost so much, about why they couldn't have what their friends had, about whether they'd ever live in a house again. The answers got shorter, more honest, less hopeful. Eventually the questions stopped, not because they got answered, but because the kids learned that asking hurt everyone, that some questions don't have good answers, that silence was kindness. They saw the house once. Drove past it by accident, or maybe on purpose, hard to say. Maybe they'd taken that route hoping, maybe they'd wanted to see it, wanted proof it still existed, that it hadn't been a dream, a shared delusion. The tree was taller, the siding looked freshly painted, there were different curtains in the windows, a different car in the driveway, a bicycle in the yard, signs of life, new life, better life, maybe. Or maybe just the same struggle with different faces. Different names on the same mortgage, different people learning the same lesson. She cried, he didn't, couldn't. The tears had dried up somewhere between the third notice and the storage unit, between the bankruptcy and the garnished wages, between hope and acceptance. He felt empty, hollow, like he'd burned through every emotion and all that was left was static, white noise, the hum of existence without feeling. He kept driving, didn't stop, didn't look back, didn't say anything. What was there to say? The house was gone, they were still here. That was the only truth that mattered. The daughter graduated high school, applied to colleges she couldn't afford, got accepted to schools she'd never attend. Student loans would follow her the way the mortgage had followed them. Different debt, same trap. She decided to work instead, said she needed a break, said she wanted to save money, said things that meant she'd learned the lesson, that she'd seen what dreams cost. What hope cost? That she was smarter than they'd been, smart enough to know better, smart enough to give up earlier. The son stopped drawing, stopped imagining, stopped talking about what he wanted to be, started talking about what he needed to earn, about salaries, about benefits, about security. He was 12 years old and talking like an accountant, like someone who'd seen too much, known too much, lost too much. They'd stolen his childhood without meaning to. Replaced it with anxiety, with pragmatism, with the cold mathematics of survival. They wanted to apologize, wanted to tell him it would be okay, but they couldn't lie anymore, didn't have the energy, the optimism, the hope required to sell that fiction. Years stacked like bills, one on top of another, each one a little heavier, a little harder. The apartment became permanent in the way temporary things do when you stop fighting them. They hung pictures, painted the bathroom, bought furniture that fit the space, made it home because home wasn't a place, it was resignation, it was acceptance, it was the end of wanting more, the end of believing in better, the end of dreams that cost 30 years and everything you had. The debt fell off their credit report eventually, 7 years, just like the law said. 7 years and the numbers disappeared. But the weight didn't. The shame didn't. The knowledge didn't. They'd learned something in those years. Something they couldn't unlearn. That nothing was safe. That nothing was permanent. That the system was designed to extract, to take, to squeeze until there was nothing left, and then move on to the next family, the next house, the next 30-year promise that meant nothing. They still paid rent, still worked, still survived. But something had changed, something fundamental. They didn't dream anymore, didn't plan, didn't hope. They existed, moved through days like walking through water. Heavy. Slow, constant resistance. They paid bills, bought groceries, went to work, came home, repeated. Life as routine, life as obligation, life as endurance. Nothing more, nothing less. The house stood somewhere, still standing, still white, still perfect from the outside, still hiding the truth behind fresh paint and mortgages and the lie of ownership. Someone else lived there now. Maybe they'd make it. Maybe they'd be smarter. Maybe they'd be luckier. Maybe the rules would change for them. But probably not. Probably they were learning the same lesson. Probably they were counting the days until the letters came, until the notices appeared, until the house stopped being theirs and became someone else's, until they understood that the house was never really anyone's, just a place that let you live there for a while if you paid enough, bled enough, gave enough, until there was nothing left to give. The house didn't care, never had, never would. It was wood and brick and siding. It didn't remember, didn't mourn, didn't feel the weight of all the families that passed through, all the dreams that died inside, all the promises that broke. It just stood there, waiting, patient, eternal, a monument to the lie, a temple to the debt, a reminder that ownership was fiction, that security was temporary, that the only thing you ever really owned was the falling, the losing, the learning to live with less. And somewhere, someone else was signing papers, shaking hands. Smiling for photos they wouldn't frame, believing it would be different for them, that they'd make it work, that 30 years was possible, that the house would someday be theirs, not knowing what everyone who'd lived there had learned, not knowing the truth that waited in fine print and adjusted payments and letters that arrived without warning, not knowing that the house was already lost, that it always had been, that it was never really theirs. Just a place to live while the debt accumulated, while the clock ran down, while they learned the lesson everyone learns eventually, that the American dream was just another word for 30 years of paying, of bleeding, of holding on until you couldn't anymore, until the house let go, until you drove away, until you learned to live with the weight. The debt was the only thing that lasted, the only thing that was really theirs. They'd earned it, carried it, fed it with years and payments and hope, and it would outlive them, would follow their children, would echo in credit reports and cautionary tales and warnings no one would listen to. Because everyone thinks they'll be different. Everyone thinks they'll make it work. Everyone thinks the house will someday be theirs, but it won't. It never is. It just lets you believe for a while, lets you hope, lets you dream, until the bill comes due, until the rules change, until the letters arrive. Until you understand that the house was never the point. The debt was the point. The control was the point. The slow extraction of everything you had was the point. The house was just the bait. The mortgage was the hook, and they'd swallowed it whole. It was never really theirs, it just let them live there for a while. If this story resonated with you, please support the channel by subscribing and tell me where you're watching from. Your comment helps decide which forgotten file we restore next, and believe me, the next one goes even deeper.